Hola a todo el mundo y bienvenido a mi canal. Yo me llamo Cine. Soy abogada afro-latina licenciada y practicando las leyes criminales, pero como todos ustedes, a mí me fascina cuando estamos hablando de casos de crímenes reales. En este video vamos a hablar del caso de Collin Griffith. Si quieren más videos en español, nada más dime allá abajo. Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Desiree. I'm a licensed and practicing Afro-Latina attorney who, much like the rest of you, has this severe fascination with true crime cases. Before we get into the case we're going to talk about today, I just want to go over some things. Because you guys are probably like, oh, she's wearing the exact same outfit as last week's case. And I am not. This is a different variation and it's a different tone. So get into that. Second, spring is my favorite season ever. I know we're not in spring yet, but I just wanted to do some spring, like floral, lawyer outfits, work outfits, court outfits. Because yeah, I'll be in court like this. And third, let's get into the case we're talking about today. The case we're talking about today is one that took a surprise turn and twist I don't think any of us would have expected. The twist was so shocking that I already had this video recorded for you guys and ready to go. And once that trial concluded, I decided it was really important for me to re-record the entire thing. I am in awe. I am dismayed. And this is the case of Collin Griffith. Before we talk about what Collin is alleged to have done, let's talk a little bit more about Collin's background. Collin Griffith, currently 17 years old, was raised in a family of 4. Collin's parents, Catherine and Charles Griffith, were married for nearly 2 full decades before they divorced in May of 2020. Catherine was affectionately known to friends and family as Kathy. Collin's brother, Christopher Griffith, was born in the year 2000 and was formally an adult when the parents divorced. According to divorce records, Catherine was the one who requested the divorce. Kathy stated that Charles was abusive throughout the entirety of their 20-year marriage. A little bit before the divorce was formally granted, Charles was given full custody of Collin. As we all might imagine, Kathy wasn't satisfied with this outcome. Charles and Collin lived in Oklahoma, while Kathy lived in Florida. A little more than 2 years after the divorce was finalized, in August of 2022, Kathy requested full legal custody of Collin. In Kathy's request, she made some pretty interesting accusations. Kathy claimed that Charles had not allowed her to contact Collin since December 31st of 2019. Kathy explained that was the last time she spoke to her son, and in a phone call to him, Collin begged for her to come pick him up from Charles's home. Kathy stated that Charles was alienating Collin from her by stalking her social media accounts and telling Collin super negative things about her. Because of the claims of stalking, Catherine told the court that she suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder and she wanted a no-contact order between her and Charles. Catherine further stated that Charles wouldn't even allow Collin to leave the home after learning that Collin was gay. In her final plea to the court, Kathy asked the court to force Charles to take Collin to child's therapy. Charles was not going to take all these accusations without a fight. He filed a response of his own. In his response, Charles said that Collin was the one who didn't want to see Kathy, and that was because she was mentally and emotionally abusive. Charles continued that Kathy was allegedly abusing drugs and alcohol. Charles further stated that the only reason he stopped Collin from communicating with his mother was because she had sent him a rather concerning text message in May of 2020. According to Charles, Kathy sent Collin a text message that stated she wanted to off herself. Charles further accused Catherine of being manic and pretending to be an adult male on Discord and trying to coerce Collin from running away from the home. Sadly, the child custody dispute would not be resolved when this case took a cryptic turn. On Valentine's Day in 2023, Collin called 911 to claim that he had killed his father, Charles, in self-defense. Collin, then only 15 years old, turning 16, stated that Charles cornered him in a room and threatened him with a knife. Ultimately, the Oklahoma Police Department arrested Collin in connection with his father's murder. Kathy got wind of the arrest. She knew what the arrest was for, but she just wanted her son back in her good graces and custody. Kathy paid Collin's $50,000 bond for him to be released pending the disposition of that case. Unfortunately, and I mean that wait wasn't long at all. 1 month later, 30 calendar days later, 4 weeks later, maybe even less than that. February is a short month. The Oklahoma Prosecutor's Office dismissed the case against Collin. In its entirety, they dismissed it. According to them, they could not disprove Collin's claim that he was acting in self-defense. Do you know how many things in life take less than 30 days to accomplish? Like huge, major things? Right, me neither. Because 30 days was not sufficient to make such a huge call. So in essence, you're rendering this kid blameless for the father's murder he told you he committed. With Charles finally out of the way, the custody dispute resolved with Kathy gaining full custody of Collin days after he murdered his father. Collin then moved from Oklahoma to be with his mother in Florida. Because Collin and Catherine were separated for nearly 4 full years, Kathy wanted to do absolutely everything she could to make the time that she had with her son memorable. She would often go on social media to gloat about what a wonderful son Collin was. They took lavish and luxurious vacations together. She even bought him a brand new Volkswagen for his high school graduation present. That relationship was not without its problems, however. In September of 2023, merely 7 months after Collin killed his father, a school safety officer called the police to do a welfare check on Collin and Catherine's home. Specifically, the school safety officer told police that Collin stated that Catherine pulled a gun out on him during a heated argument. Collin also told the school safety officer that Catherine said she would kill him first and then kill herself. Catherine adamantly and vehemently denied these claims. She stated that Collin was just upset because she took his AirPods due to him failing his classes. Catherine further stated that Collin was diagnosed with PTSD after his time living with his father. Following these claims, Collin was put into protective custody for a mental health evaluation to be conducted. Although Collin was initially scheduled to be released 8 days later, the facility held on to him for just a little bit longer. Why, you ask? Well, because Collin told them that if released back to his mother, he would kill her. Collin's exact words to staff were, "I will kill myself or my mom, throw my mom out of the car, shoot or stab her. I've done it before to my dad. I know I can do it again." Prosecutors state that this was not the first threat of this kind that Collin had made towards his mother. Specifically, Collin got real comfortable telling his maternal grandfather about the modalities by which he wanted to kill her. Collin said, "More than anything else, I want to slit her throat and feel her bleed out and feel the life leave her body. That's just how much I hate her." Collin's grandfather, Robert, responded by telling Collin that he was appalled that Collin would say such things. He told him that he knew that Kathy and he had their issues, but that was absolutely no way to speak of his mother. In response to these threats, or in an attempted response to these threats, the police department would do continuous welfare checks on the home to make sure that everyone was okay. And why do I say in an attempt to respond to these threats? I don't know, because, you've got a kid that already killed one parent, admitted to killing one parent, whether or not he was legally guilty for that crime, who's now threatening to kill the other parent. And I don't know, you just send some officers once a week and you're just like, oh, this'll do. I digress. Kathy was so fearful of Collin that she started to place little ring cameras everywhere inside of her home. She wanted to make sure to capture her interactions with Collin, as well as his interactions when she wasn't present. After all of these continuous threats, Kathy then placed Collin in a long-term facility where he would stay for several months before returning to live with her. Shortly after being released from the facility, Collin picked up a domestic violence case against, guess who? You guessed it, his mother. Collin attacked his mother by pulling her hair, kneeing her in the groin, and stomping on her hand. That case ultimately resolved, with Collin being placed on probation. But, not before Collin could make yet another threat to law enforcement in this case. You see, before Collin was placed on probation or shortly thereafter, he told law enforcement that he wanted to kill his mother. Specifically, Collin said that he would kill her if he were to be released back to her. Did law enforcement do something at that point? No. They released Collin back to his mother. And unfortunately, no matter how hard they tried, no matter how many welfare visits were conducted, they couldn't stop Collin from making his threats come to life. On September 8th of 2024, a little over 18 months after Collin brutally murdered his father, he called the police in Florida to tell them that he had killed his mother in guess what? Yeah, self-defense.
18, 14, 11, 2nd, September 8, 2024. 911, what's the address of the emergency? Hampton in Florida. I don't know the fucking, I don't know the city address. My mom is talking to EMS now. She's bleeding out. Please help. Your mom is doing what? My mom's bleeding out. She's bleeding out. Okay, what's the address? Or where do you think you are? What road are you at? What crosses that road? Hampton in Florida. You go through the gate and you take the first right, and it's the house with the black dead out front. I'm trying to get it. Hampton Inn? Hampton Inn, yes, ma'am. What city is it in? Well, it's Auburndale. I can get it to you. I can't get her up. Okay, how do I lift someone? I need to get her to the hospital. How do I lift someone? Okay, you've called 911, and we're going to send an ambulance. He doesn't have time.
Specifically, Collin told the police that his mother had fallen on a knife after a very long fight. Do you remember how I said that I re-recorded this video? Because the first time I recorded this video for you guys, it was still in trial, and it has now concluded. So before we talk a little bit about the trial, I'm going to talk to you about my overall impressions of the trial. First, what did I say? This case was in trial relatively recently. He just murdered his mother in September of 2024. So not even 5 months later, and we're in trial on this case. Actually, 4 months. 4 months. And we're in trial on this case. That just seems rushed and quick. And I completely understand. What you're going to retort to me is, well, Desiree, defendants have a right to a speedy trial. And I agree. So nothing is telling me that Collin did not exert his right to a speedy trial and did not want prosecutors to prove this case within that 6-month time frame. That is not the issue. The issue is when you know that there's a case like this with news coverage, with national coverage, a high stakes case, mainstream case, What you do is you put that as a priority and you organize those 4 months you have to the best of your ability. And I just don't know if I can say the prosecutors here did that. And let me go back. Prosecutor, singular. So that goes to my next point. There was only one prosecutor involved in this case, Mark Levine. I mean, Mr. Levine was fine. I mean, he did okay. You know what I'm saying? But generally speaking, when you have a case of this magnitude, I just don't understand why there weren't 2 prosecutors involved in the prosecution of this case. I don't get it. I was speaking to a friend of mine who was a former prosecutor in Florida, who said sometimes the office just doesn't have the manpower with all the cases going to trial to have 2 people on a case. Fair enough. I don't care. This case was such a big deal. There should have been manpower. You should have found someone, and we're all busy. I'm busy, you're busy, the world is busy. You have to make time. Okay. My third complaint. The entirety of the trial lasted 5 days. 5 days. 5 days. I have had trials that are not murders that have lasted 2 full weeks, even into 3 weeks. So how is it that a trial of this magnitude with charges of this severity are just 5-day trials? And I'm being generous when I say 5 days. 5 days as in on the 5th day they were doing the closing for this trial, okay? It's above me, okay? But let's just talk a little bit more about what happened during his trial. The first day of Collin's murder trial began on January 29th of 2025. Prosecutor Mark Levine started by detailing the tumultuous relationship between Kathy and Collin.
Mr. Levine, does the state wish to give an opening statement?
Yes, thank you.
You may proceed.
All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It was a Sunday evening, September 8th of last year, in Auburndale, Florida. And it was at that time that the defendant viciously and savagely unleashed his full fury and hatred towards his mother upon her, when he stabbed her with such force that the knife went shooting through her neck muscles, through her esophagus, through her trachea, through her thyroid cartilage, and shot out the other side of her neck. You will hear and see that as this happened, she began to bleed, and bleed profusely through the huge gash in her neck. While she bled, the defendant was there and watched as the blood came out of the huge hole in her neck. You're going to hear that he was there as he watched the blood and the life drain from her body until she took her final breath and was officially dead. You're also going to hear that this was exactly what the defendant meant to do, and that this is exactly what the defendant had thought about doing and had wanted to do for quite some time. So much so that he told multiple people, including multiple Charlotte County Sheriff's Office deputies and his own grandfather, the father of the defendant's mother, Collin Griffith. His name's Robert Walantas. You're going to hear from him. He'll fly in from New Mexico, and he'll tell you about those haunting statements that the defendant made. And you're going to see that exactly what the defendant said he wanted to do and said that he would do, he accomplished on the night of September 8th of last year. But how did Collin Griffith get there, bleeding out on her mother's kitchen floor? In order to understand that, we're going to have to take a step back and take a walk through some time. So you're going to see, of course, not just what happened on and around September 7th and September 8th, some of the critical time leading up to the murder, but you're also going to see and hear how this all began. Now, we're going to take a trip back to February 14th of 2023, the year prior to the defendant killing his mom. At that time, the defendant lived in Oklahoma. And you're going to hear on February 14th of 2023, the defendant killed somebody else when he shot that person 2 times. He shot that person in the chest, and he shot that person in the head. You're going to hear that it was undisputed that he shot that person, that he was arrested for that killing, and that he has not been charged to this date.
In their opening, defense stated that Kathy was the one who was manic and erratic. They further continued that any of the issues she had with Collin were because of her.
Does the defense wish to give an opening statement? You may proceed, Ms. Thornhill.
Good morning. You're probably expecting me to say something very different from what Mr. Levine presented, and you'd be right. I'm going to start by introducing some of the people that are a part of this family and whom you will hear from. You've heard some of their names already, but I think it's helpful if you know the relationships among them. So first we have Collin Griffith. Obviously, you are aware of him. He's 17 years old. Catherine, or Kathy, as she's known, Kathy Griffith, is Collin's mom. And tragically and sadly, she is no longer with us. Susan Dethman is the third main person who is involved in this saga. Susan Dethman is Kathy's mom and Collin's grandmother. Christopher Griffith is Collin's older brother, so son of Kathy and of Charles Griffith, who goes by Chuck sometimes. He was born when Kathy was very, very young. She got pregnant when she was 13. She gave birth at 14. Collin came along a few years later. You've already heard about Robert Walantas. He is Kathy's father and Collin's grandfather. You heard that he lives in New Mexico, and he has for many years. He's sort of removed from the family a little bit. Some other names you may hear are Christy Rooney, who is Kathy's older sister, oldest child of Susan and Chuck. John Paul Walantas, who is the younger brother of Kathy, also the child of Susan and Robert Walantas. Susan is now Dethman. Finally, there is Nikki Markovich, who is now Susan's husband, and Kevin Markovich, who is the son of Susan and Nikki, so the half-brother of Kathy and the half-uncle to Collin. Okay? I should have drawn a family tree, but at any rate, this family, like a lot of families, at times is very close and at times has its issues. You'll hear about these cruises that multiple family members took together, but you'll also hear about estrangements and fights. The common denominator in the estrangements and fights Kathy Griffith.
On this day, the prosecution then called their first witness, Nancy Jones, who was a neighbor to Catherine and Collin. Nancy testified that she had seen a fight break out between the two shortly before Catherine was murdered.
What happened next? I went back to the house and started doing some dishes and stuff, and then I walked back outside and sat down on my lanai, and then I seen. Do you want me to go into the details now?
Yes.
I seen the lady standing on the top step, and I just seen an arm come out and grab her by the shoulder, by her hair, and I just turned my head and immediately went back into the house.
The second day of Collin's murder trial continued on January 30th of 2025. During this day, prosecutors mainly called law enforcement witnesses to testify about the multiple threats that Collin made towards Catherine.
And Deputy Welch, is it a fair statement that the defendant, in reference to killing his mom or his grandma, said, "I will kill my mom"?
Yes,
So it wasn't dependent on anything, it was, "I will kill my mom"?
that's correct.
And when you asked him how that would happen, his response was throw them out of the car, shoot, or stab?
Yes,
And is that when he said that he killed before and could kill again?
yes.
All right, I have nothing further.
The third day of Collin's trial continued on January 31st of 2025. On this day, the prosecution called their medical expert to testify about Kathy's cause and manner of death.
Now, from your conducting the autopsy and your training and experience, what was the cause of death?
So the cause of death is stab wound of the right neck.
And what was the manner of death?
In this case, the manner of death is homicide.
And when you say the manner of death is homicide, what does that mean?
So with the information that would have been provided to me at the time, and with the examination and what I've viewed and witnessed and reviewed, the explanation for this death is that this wound was inflicted by another person.
So is it a fair statement that it is not consistent with somebody accidentally falling on a knife?
I haven't been given that explanation before, but I think that would be rather extraordinary. No, I don't believe so.
So your end result was that this was, the manner of death was a homicide, a killing caused by somebody else, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
All right, Dr. Garavan, I have no further questions.
Thank you.
In a heart-wrenching turn of events, Collin's grandfather and Kathy's father, Robert, took the stand to testify about how they all feared Collin and the numerous threats he had made on Catherine's life.
Based upon your personal observations, did it appear that the defendant trusted you and would talk to you and confide in you about certain things, grandfather, grandson topics?
Yes.
Did there come a time when the defendant said something to you that was very disturbing to you?
Yes.
Tell the jury about what the defendant said to you.
My grandson was very aggravated at his grandmother and his mother. He said, "I am so tired of these two bitches. I'm disgusted." He said, "My mom, I keep thinking over and over, I want to slit her throat. I want her to bleed out. I want to smell the blood. I want to feel the blood. I want to feel the life and the blood leaving her body."
Now, when he said that, what went through your mind?
I needed to take a deep breath and do what I could to discourage that thought, because thoughts become words, words become actions.
What did you say to him in response?
I said, "Collin, I love you, buddy, but you can't have those kinds of thoughts and focus on them and then speak them, because you will cause them to become reality. Please think positive things about your mom, about yourself, and about a good future together.
Now, at any point, did you warn your daughter about what the defendant was wanting to do to her?
I did, but I did not use the exact words because there was so much malice.
Objection, Judge.
Now, explain to the jury, were you concerned that if you used the exact words the defendant said that he wanted to do to his mom, that might negatively affect their mother-son relationship?
It would, and I was afraid it would actually give her nightmares.
Did you tell her a clean version or a more vanilla version, if you will?
Yes, I did.
What was her response?
That he's been threatening her, and he's been threatening Susan multiple times with killing both of them.
Now, knowing that, though, did she still want him in the household and wanted to keep having the relationship with him?
Yes.
Thank you, Cross.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Mr. Walantas, you didn't come to Kathy's funeral, did you?
No.
Can you explain why?
The funeral for a person is for those left behind. I will see Kathy in my thoughts, in my mind. That's where I want to keep her. Attending a funeral where her body is placed in the ground, that's not Kathy. Kathy's spirit is elsewhere. The essence of Kathy is elsewhere. She's with me. She's here in this room today with each of you. She can speak to you. She can speak to me.
Mr. Walantas,
Ma'am?
I asked whether you went to the funeral and why. Just answer that question, please.
You interrupted me as I was explaining why. That you don't like my response, ma'am, that's your problem.
Prosecution then recalled a witness that it had called the day prior, Detective Danny Peters. Detective Peters introduced text message exchanges between Collin and Catherine.
According to the Cellbrite report, is that sent by the mom to her son, the defendant?
Yes.
And a time that it was sent and or typed?
Yes.
What's the time?
The time is 12:02 p.m.
And that would be on Sunday, September
Correct.
8th?
September 8th, 2024.
And then on the cell phone, what does it say? The time?
12:29.
All right, so at or between 12:02 and 12:29, the message is sent, typed, received. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right, if you could, go ahead and read the full content of the text message.
Okay. Begins, the car isn't there. Not sure what you did, but it's being sold as we speak to CarMax for $15,600. Unless you'd like to reply to my text and tell me you're driving home right now. Period. Didn't think so. It's a felony to drive a stolen car without insurance, and if you wreck it, that's it. How much are you going to lose before you stop, Collin? ? I feel like you were trying to make me like your dad by talking away privileges, but you violated your probation, violated the rules of the house, and now you won't answer me. My mom or the cops, you've left me with no choice. Collin, the recordings of you admitting to killing blank and planning the murder, there are 4 different instances from my Ring camera, are all going to Bob, Susie, Amanda, and Chris at 3 p.m. today. Plus the recovered audio from blank's iCloud where you told your blank you hated me and I was an evil bitch are being sent to. My dad is sending his recordings of you telling him how much you correction, how you planned my murder back in February. Audio, video, email, text, and phone recordings are being sent. For the record, no, you cannot have a single one. Your attorney can request them. Good luck hiring a good one.
The fourth day of Collin's murder trial continued on February 3rd of 2025. You know what I thought was interesting that happened this day? The prosecution rested. Why is that interesting? Well, it had only been like 2.5 days. So you presented the entirety of what you want the jury to consider in 2.5 days. So what you are telling me is that after 2.5 days, you have introduced all evidence that you want the jurors to consider in this case. In this case right here. At this time, defense called their one and only witness, Collin's maternal grandmother, Kathy's mom, Susan.
Have you ever personally witnessed Kathy engage in a physical act of violence towards Collin?
I know that there was a fight at the house in Port Charlotte, and the fight started because she was beating him with a belt and making him do push-ups, sit-ups, push-ups, and then holding a weight above his head while he was running in place.
Okay. When you say that she beat him with a belt, were you actually there for
Yes,
that?
I was, and I tried to stop it.
Right. What about, are you aware that Kathy pulled a gun on Collin?
Yes, and then later she said that she denied it. Then she said yes. She pulled out the gun and handed it to Collin and said, "Just kill me, shoot me."
So she actually admitted that to you?
Yes.
It had appeared as if Susan and Kathy were estranged. Susan testified as to Kathy's erratic nature. She basically stated if there were issues between Collin and Kathy, those issues were mostly on Kathy. Susan continued that Kathy was extraordinarily abusive towards Collin, and Collin merely did what he had to do to protect himself. The fifth day of Collin's murder trial continued on February 4th of 2025. On this day, both the prosecution and defense delivered their closing arguments. For his part, Prosecutor Mark Levine continued about the tumultuous relationship between Kathy and Collin. He stated that Collin's actions were anything but self-defense.
Ladies and gentlemen, the brutality and the carnage that Collin Griffith unloaded on his mom on September 8th of 2024 is as real as it gets. First, I'd like to thank you for not only being here, but for your attention. When you came to jury selection, you had no idea what type of case you might encounter. Would it be a petty theft, a DUI? But what you ultimately heard and sat on was a first-degree murder case with a second count of kidnapping. So to hear and see what you had to go through is not something that jurors see every day, and most certainly most people never think about or see. But you've heard and seen the evidence, and later this morning and into the afternoon, you will be doing what you came here to do. And that is to dispense the ultimate form of justice. Not because I'm asking you to do this or suggesting you do this, but based upon the facts and the evidence, the defendant sits there, a guilty person who stabbed his own mother in the neck and then watched her bleed out in front of him. The lady that brought him into this world here on earth, he took out of this world and this earth. But see, at the end of this, he has to watch you come back through those doors. And he has to stand and he has to listen to the verdict. And that verdict is out of my control. It's out of their control. It is 100% in your control. And I have faith and confidence based upon what you heard and saw that you will do the right thing and you will hold him accountable for the fury he unleashed on his mom. Because the cold hard facts and the reality is quite unthinkable when you really think about it. The reality of what that person did to his mom is a second-by-second nightmare for her. She left this world knowing that the person that took her out was the son that she gave everything to.
For their part, defense argued the exact opposite. That Collin merely did what he had to, again, to protect his safety.
This was self-defense. So, the state wants you to believe that this was a premeditated murder. In order to do that, once again, they have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Collin intended to kill her and beyond a reasonable doubt that he was not acting in self-defense. That's what you would have to find. You heard a lot of outrage from the prosecutor in his closing statement. And this is an awful situation. But there was no outrage about how Kathy had behaved, how Kathy had treated her son, how she had treated other people. And I'm not saying you have to have outrage at that. You've heard a lot of unfavorable things about Kathy. And I am not going to go through every single one because you took notes, you heard and saw, you heard from the state's own witnesses, those things. Susan confirmed them. But remember, the incidents that you heard about Kathy being violent in the past or making things up in the past were all corroborated, either by police reports, DCF reports that Detective Zanoniani had reviewed, or by witnesses, by Susan. I was not presenting those to you to just bash Kathy, to make her look like a horrible person. To the contrary, I was doing my job because the law says, and the judge will tell you, that you have to consider prior acts of violence, prior acts of aggression, a reputation for dangerous and violent behavior, in deciding whether Collin was reasonable in defending himself against his mom on September 8th.
After both sides delivered their closing argument, the case was given to a jury for a couple of hours for deliberation. The jury did not make a decision on that day, so they returned for the 6th day of Collin's trial on February 5th of 2025. Following a few more hours of deliberation, the jury announced its verdict.
All right, please.
Please be seated. If you are the foreperson, please raise your hand.
For the record, juror number 1980896 has raised his or her hand. You may put your hand down. Juror number 1980896, if the jury has reached a verdict, please raise your hand. That juror has his or her hand raised. You may put your hand down. Please pass the verdict form to the bailiff. There are no defects nor omissions in the verdict. Counsel for the state, counsel for the defendant, rise and hearken to the verdict. Mr. Griffith, rise and hearken to the verdict.
State of Florida versus Collin Griffith. Will the jury find as follows? As to the defendant in this case, the defendant, as to count one, the defendant is not guilty. As to count two, the defendant is not guilty. So say will, this 5th day of February, 2025.
This case is astonishing to me. And I'm not doing anything in critique of the jurors. They did their duty. They analyzed the evidence. I wasn't in the courtroom. I don't know. What I am saying, though, is it feels as if two people, both Charles and Kathy, lost their lives at the hands of their son who admitted it. This is not speculated. He admitted it. And there was no way in either case to hold him accountable. It's shortly before Valentine's Day in this year of 2025. This video will go up on Valentine's Day of this year, 2025. And Charles was murdered on Valentine's Day of 2023. Another year without justice for Charles. I hope and pray, for Collin's sake, we don't see his name associated anywhere near the judicial system any further. Based on statements he's made, I'm not sure that he won't feel emboldened and now feel like he's above the law. From my perspective, there was no justice done in either case. But again, the judicial system works how it's supposed to. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Until next time, take care.